It was supposed to be just another routine flight. 3 planes took off on ordinary days, carrying ordinary people with ordinary plans. But somewhere between takeoff and their intended destinations, these aircraft vanished into thin air, leaving behind grieving families, unanswered questions, and mysteries that continue to haunt the aviation world. This is the story of 3 planes that took off but never landed, each disappearance more baffling than the last, each leaving a void that time has failed to fill. On November 3, 1978, Irving Rivers left St. Croix in a Piper Navajo he was piloting for Eastern Caribbean Airways. The experienced pilot was making a solo flight to position the plane in St. Thomas to pick up passengers. Visibility was good and temperatures were warm. Rivers wasn't just any pilot, he was a seasoned professional who knew these routes like the back of his hand. The Caribbean skies were his office, the islands below his daily commute. During the flight, the control tower operator radioed a flight suggestion to avoid a small shower, and Rivers radioed his acknowledgement and made the adjustment. As he neared the airport in St. Thomas, the plane was cleared for landing, and the controller saw the plane's red and green lights blinking as it made the approach. Everything was normal. Everything was going according to plan. The air traffic controller at St. Thomas had spotted the lights of Rivers' aircraft and had even cleared the plane to land. The runway was right there, just a mile away. Rivers had made this approach hundreds of times before. The controller watched the familiar blinking lights drawing closer, preparing for another routine landing on another routine evening. Soon after another plane made a planned departure, the controller found he could no longer see the plane's lights. It had disappeared from the radar. An emergency search effort was launched, but nothing was ever found. Even though the flight was only 1 mile from landing, 1 mile. That's all that separated Irving Rivers from safety. 1 mile between him and the runway, where ground crews were waiting to service his plane for the next flight. In the span of moments, a perfectly functioning aircraft with an experienced pilot simply ceased to exist. No distress call, no explosion, no debris washing up on nearby shores, just nothing. A Navy SH-3G Sea King aircraft commander recalled launching from NS Roosevelt Roads late that night to begin the search. Although it was a very dark night with no visible horizon, they could see the lights of the airport clearly. At one point, the crew chief thought he saw something submerged under the water, illuminated by their searchlight, but they never reacquired it visually again. They continued the search for approximately 4 hours until they needed to return to base due to low fuel. The search team scoured every inch of water between St. Croix and St. Thomas. Ships crisscrossed the area where Rivers should have been. Divers plunged into the warm Caribbean waters, but the Piper Navajo had vanished as completely as if it had never existed at all. Eastern Caribbean Airways, Flight 912, flew from St. Croix to St. Thomas on November 3, 1978. The control tower in St. Thomas sighted the aircraft, but it vanished shortly after, and no trace of the flight was found. Years later, a message appeared online from MSG Patrick Rivers, serving with the 101st Airborne Division, thanking those who had searched for his grandfather, Captain Irving Rivers. A grandson growing up without the grandfather who should have landed safely that November evening. A family forever wondering what happened in that final mile. The disappearance of Irving Rivers and his Piper Navajo would become one of many mysteries attributed to the Bermuda Triangle, that infamous stretch of ocean between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, where ships and planes seemed to vanish without explanation. But for the Rivers family, it wasn't about mysterious forces or supernatural theories. It was about a good man who went to work one day and never came home. Fast forward to more recent times, and the aviation world continues to be plagued by inexplicable disappearances, though none quite matches the scale and global impact of what happened on March 8, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, MH370, MAS370, was an international passenger flight operated by Malaysia Airlines that disappeared from radar on 8 March 2014, while flying from Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia to its planned destination, Beijing Capital International Airport in China. This wasn't supposed to happen in the 21st century. We live in an age of satellites and GPS, of constant communication and real-time tracking. A Boeing 747, one of the most advanced aircraft in the world, doesn't just disappear. But that's exactly what happened. The plane departed from Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:41 a.m. and was scheduled to arrive in Beijing Capital International Airport at 6:30 a.m. local time. At 1:07 a.m., the aircraft's last automated position report was sent, and at 1:19 a.m., what turned out to be the final voice transmission from the cockpit was relayed to air traffic controllers. Smash 2, "Good night Malaysian 370, a message that suggested nothing out of the ordinary. "Good night Malaysian 370, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah said, as he bade farewell to Malaysian air traffic control. These would be the last words anyone would hear from Flight 370. 7 words that gave no hint of what was about to unfold. 1 mile, that's all that separated Irving Rivers from safety. 1 mile between him and the runway, where ground crews were waiting to service his plane for the next flight. In the span of moments, a perfectly functioning aircraft with an experienced pilot simply ceased to exist. No distress call, no explosion, no debris washing up on nearby shores. Just nothing. A Navy SH-3G Sea King aircraft commander recalled launching from NS Roosevelt Roads late that night to begin the search. Although it was a very dark night with no visible horizon, they could see the lights of the airport clearly. At one point, the crew chief thought he saw something submerged under the water, illuminated by their searchlight, but they never reacquired it visually again. They continued the search for approximately 4 hours until they needed to return to base due to low fuel. The search team scoured every inch of water between St. Croix and St. Thomas. Ships crisscrossed the area where rivers should have been. Divers plunged into the warm Caribbean waters. But the Piper Navajo had vanished as completely as if it had never existed at all. Eastern Caribbean Airways, Flight 92 flew from St. Croix to St. Thomas on November 3, 1978. The control tower in St. Thomas sighted the aircraft, but it vanished shortly after, and no trace of the flight was found. Years later, a message appeared online from MSG Patrick Rivers, serving with the 101st Airborne Division, thanking those who had searched for his grandfather, Captain Irving Rivers. A grandson growing up without the grandfather who should have landed safely that November evening. A family forever wondering what happened in that final mile. The disappearance of Irving Rivers and his Piper Navajo would become one of many mysteries. Attributed to the Bermuda Triangle, that infamous stretch of ocean between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, where ships and planes seem to vanish without explanation. But for the Rivers family, it wasn't about mysterious forces or supernatural theories. It was about a good man who went to work one day and never came home. Fast forward to more recent times, and the aviation world continues to be plagued by inexplicable disappearances, though none quite matches the scale and global impact of what happened on March 8, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, MH370, MAS370, was an international passenger flight operated by Malaysia Airlines that disappeared from radar on 8 March 2014, while flying from Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia to its planned destination, Beijing Capital International Airport in China. This wasn't supposed to happen in the 21st century. We live in an age of satellites and GPS, of constant communication and real-time tracking. A Boeing 777, one of the most advanced aircraft in the world, doesn't just disappear. But that's exactly what happened. The plane departed from Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:41 a.m. and was scheduled to arrive in Beijing Capital International Airport at 6:30 a.m. local time. At 1:07 a.m., the aircraft's last automated position report was sent, and at 1:19 a.m., what turned out to be the final voice transmission from the cockpit was relayed to air traffic controllers. "Good night, Malaysian 370, a message that suggested nothing out of the ordinary. "Good night, Malaysian 370, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah said as he bade farewell to Malaysian air traffic control. These would be the last words anyone would hear from Flight 370. 7 words that gave no hint of what was about to unfold. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was 53 years old, a veteran pilot with over 18,000 flight hours under his belt. First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid was his co-pilot that night. In the cabin, the Malaysian crew was led by Supervisor Patrick Gomez, who had worked for the airline for 35 years. These were experienced professionals, people who had dedicated their lives to aviation. The Boeing 777 was carrying 239 passengers and crew members, most of them Chinese nationals. Among them were a group of prominent Chinese artists who had been showing their calligraphy in Kuala Lumpur, 2 Iranians traveling on fake European passports, an Indonesian heading to Beijing to start a new job, a Malaysian couple on their honeymoon, young families with children, and a stunt double for Jet Li. Each passenger had a story, a reason for being on that plane. Some were returning home after business trips. Others were embarking on new adventures. Children clutched their parents' hands as they boarded, excited about flying through the night sky. The Malaysian couple on their honeymoon were probably planning their future together, unaware that they had less than 2 hours left. Then it became clear that the aircraft had never entered Vietnamese airspace. Shortly after Zahari signed off, MH370 went dark. Its transponders were turned off and its tracking system was somehow disabled. Military radar showed the plane left its flight path to fly back over northern Malaysia and Penang Island, and then out into the Andaman Sea towards the tip of the Indonesian island of Sumatra. Something had gone terribly wrong. The aircraft that should have been heading northeast toward Beijing had turned around, flying back over Malaysia. But this wasn't a simple emergency return to the airport. Malaysian authorities added that military tracking radar indicated that MH370 made a sharp turn over the South China Sea as it headed toward the Strait of Malacca and then changed altitude. The final sighting on military radar was on March 8th at 2:22 a.m. Malaysian time. From there, the aircraft turned south, out into the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. This is where the story takes an even more chilling turn. Inmarsat, a British satellite operator, was able to show that MH370 continued to ping for at least 6 hours after it left Malaysian airspace, indicating that the plane continued to fly. 6 hours. The plane flew on in silence for 6 hours, its passengers and crew either unaware of their fate or unable to do anything about it. An early breakthrough came after experts discovered that an Inmarsat satellite over the Indian Ocean had received signals from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 after it disappeared from the military radar. As MH370 flew further off course, it continued to exchange digital handshake signals with the Inmarsat satellite. These electronic handshakes, automated communications between the plane and the satellite, painted a ghostly picture of MH370's final hours. The plane wasn't communicating with anyone on the ground, but the machinery kept talking to the satellites above, creating a breadcrumb trail into the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote places on Earth. On March 24th, Malaysia's Prime Minister announced the flight was presumed lost somewhere in the Indian Ocean. For the families of the 239 people on board, this announcement brought no closure, only more questions. How could a modern airliner simply vanish? Why did it change course? What happened during those 6 silent hours? The search for the missing aircraft became the most expensive search in the history of aviation. Ships and planes from multiple nations scoured vast expanses of ocean. Underwater vehicles dove to crushing depths, scanning the seafloor for any sign of wreckage. The search area was massive. Imagine trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is the size of a continent and buried under miles of water. The lack of official information in the days immediately after the disappearance prompted fierce criticism from the Chinese public, particularly from relatives of the passengers, as most people on board Flight 370 were of Chinese origin. Families gathered at airports, first waiting for news of delays, then holding on to hope for survivors, and finally demanding answers that no one could provide. More than half the passengers on board were from China, and there were angry scenes. Amid growing frustration at the airline's inability to tell relatives what had happened to their loved ones. Imagine being told that your loved one's plane has disappeared and then waiting days, weeks, months for any information. The agony of not knowing is sometimes worse than the finality of loss. On July 29, 2015, residents of La Réunion Island, off the coast of Madagascar, discovered a wing fragment that appears to be a part of a Boeing 777 and possibly a part of the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. Finally, after more than a year, a piece of evidence. In 2015, the first piece of debris from the airplane was discovered, the right wing flaperon, which washed ashore on Réunion. Over the next year and a half, 26 more pieces of debris were found on the shores of Tanzania, Mozambique, South Africa, Madagascar, and Mauritius. 3 of the 27 pieces were positively identified as coming from Flight 370, and 17 were thought to have likely come from the plane. Each piece of debris was a heartbreak and a hope. Heartbreak because it confirmed the plane had crashed, hope because it might lead to answers. But the debris told only part of the story. It confirmed that MH370 had ended up in the Indian Ocean, but not why or exactly where. Despite a search spanning hundreds of thousands of square miles, only a couple of dozen pieces of debris have been found after they washed ashore on the East African coast and islands in the Indian Ocean. Experts believe the plane itself could be miles underwater. The theories about what happened to MH370 are numerous and range from the mechanical to the sinister. After Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 went missing in 2014, a number of theories were proposed. One of the most commonly cited explanations is pilot suicide. In 2016, it was reported that Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, on his home flight simulator, had flown over the southern Indian Ocean less than a month before the plane vanished. The simulated flight closely matched the missing aircraft's final path. Investigators noted strange behavior by Shah from conducting 170 interviews, namely, that the captain had made no social or professional plans for after 8th of March when Flight 370 disappeared. But according to the French journalist Florence de Changy, who wrote a book about the flight, Shah made an appointment with his dentist to get back his tooth crown when the dentist phoned him a few days before 8th of March, Malaysian. Authorities determined the combination could suggest deliberate human intervention. Kok Soo Chon, the head of the safety investigation team, said the known pieces of evidence irresistibly point to unlawful interference. But pointing to human intervention doesn't tell us whose intervention or why. Some thought the plane ran out of fuel and the pilots unsuccessfully tried to make an emergency landing, while others believed the pilots lost control of the aircraft. More ominously, some theorized that one of the pilots went rogue or the plane was hijacked. Each theory has its supporters and its flaws. Each raises more questions than it answers. Officials indicated it was possible the crew and passengers had become unresponsive due to hypoxia or oxygen loss sometime before the plane crashed. This theory suggests everyone on board may have been unconscious during those final hours, the plane flying on autopilot until it ran out of fuel, a ghost flight carrying 239 souls through the night sky. The impact of MH370's disappearance extended far beyond the families of those on board. Malaysia Airlines was struggling financially, a problem that was exacerbated by a decrease of ticket sales after the disappearance of Flight 370 and the downing of Flight 17. The airline was renationalized by the end of 2014. The airline that had been a source of national pride became associated with tragedy. On July 17, 2014, 4 months after Flight 370 vanished, tragedy struck again for Malaysia Airlines, when one of its planes was shot down over eastern Ukraine near the Russian border. All 298 people aboard the aircraft, also a Boeing 777, perished. Flight 17 was downed by a Russian-made surface-to-air missile fired from territory controlled by Russian-backed separatists. 2 Boeing 777s, 2 tragedies, 537 lives lost. For Malaysia Airlines, 2014 became a year of unimaginable loss. For the families affected, national tragedies became personal catastrophes that would reshape their lives forever. In March 2014, Flight MH370 vanished from radar. Shortly after taking off from Kuala Lumpur Airport en route to Beijing, more than 10 years later, the 239 people, 12 crew members and 227 passengers on board have still not been located or recovered. But the search for the truth continues. 10 years after Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared, the Malaysian government and a US technology company are considering a new underwater search for the wreckage in an effort to solve one of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time. Ocean Infinity, the company that searched unsuccessfully in 2018, believes new technology and analysis might finally locate the wreckage. It is an issue affecting lives of people, and whatever needs to be done must be done, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim told reporters during a visit to Australia. For the families who have waited over a decade for answers, these words offer a glimmer of hope that the mystery might finally be solved. While MH370 captured global attention due to its scale and the mystery surrounding its disappearance, the world of aviation has seen numerous other aircraft vanish without explanation. Some, like the Eastern Caribbean Airways Navajo, disappeared close to their destinations. Others vanished in remote areas where searches were nearly impossible. 2. Beechcraft King Air series, known for its reliability and safety record, has not been immune to mysterious disappearances. These twin-engine turboprops are workhorses of regional aviation, used for everything from executive transport to medical evacuations. They're the kind of planes that fly every day without incident, piloted by experienced aviators who know their aircraft inside and out. On September 1, 2019, a Beechcraft King Air 350 crashed into a tourist resort in Calamba Laguna, Philippines, while performing a medevac flight from Dipolog to Manila. All 9 occupants aboard were killed in the crash. This particular incident, while tragic, at least provided answers. The wreckage was found, the victims recovered, the families given closure. But not all King Air incidents end with such clarity. The aircraft type has been involved in various incidents over the years, from bird strikes to mechanical failures, from weather-related crashes to pilot error. Each incident is investigated, lessons are learned, and aviation becomes a little bit safer. But for every solved case, there are others that remain mysteries. On June 30, 2019, a Beechcraft King Air 350 twin turboprop leaving Addison Airport near Dallas on a flight to Florida crashed into a hangar beside the runway. Either the impact or the ensuing explosion and fire killed all 10 people aboard. The pilot, in spite of his lifetime of flying experience and countless successful proficiency checks, stepped on the wrong rudder pedal. This serves as a sobering reminder that even experienced pilots can make fatal mistakes. In the high-stress moments of an emergency, when split-second decisions mean the difference between life and death, even the most trained professionals can err. It humanizes these tragedies. These aren't just statistics or aircraft registration numbers, but people who dedicated their lives to aviation and, in a moment of crisis, made a mistake that cost everything. The psychological impact of aircraft disappearances extends far beyond the immediate families affected. When Malaysians woke up to the news that the plane had gone missing, they were shocked. Despite perennial problems with its finances, the national carrier had a good safety record and a place in many a Malaysian heart. As the hours passed, and no one seemed to have much idea of what had happened, shock turned to disbelief. Harvard professor Cass Sunstein noted that the conflicting information initially released by the Malaysian government explains the interest in alternative theories. Sunstein argued that conspiracy theories in general often are born out of horrific and disastrous situations, because such events make people angry, fearful, and looking for a target. When planes disappear without explanation, it challenges our fundamental belief in the safety and predictability of modern life. We board aircraft with the assumption that technology and training have eliminated the mysteries of flight. When that assumption is shattered, we're left grappling with uncomfortable truths about the limits of our control. The families of those who disappeared on these flights face a unique form of grief. Without bodies to bury or crash sites to visit, they're trapped in a limbo between hope and despair. Some cling to theories that their loved ones might somehow have survived. Others simply want to know what happened in those final moments. In June 2014, relatives of passengers on Flight 370 began a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo to raise $100,000, with an ultimate goal of raising $5 million as a reward to encourage anyone with knowledge of the location of Flight 370 or the cause of its disappearance to reveal what they knew. This desperate attempt to find answers shows the lengths to which families will go when official channels fail to provide closure. The aviation industry has learned hard lessons from these disappearances. Flight 370's disappearance brought to public attention the limits of aircraft tracking and flight recorders, including the limited battery life of underwater locator beacons. Today, there are calls for real-time tracking of all commercial aircraft, longer-lasting emergency beacons, and better communication systems that can't be disabled from the cockpit. But technology can only do so much. The ocean is vast. The Earth is large, and despite our best efforts, there are still places where aircraft can disappear beyond our reach. The southern Indian Ocean is one of the most remote parts of the world, making the search extremely difficult. As we reflect on these three flights, the Eastern Caribbean Airways Navajo that vanished 1 mile from safety, the Malaysian Airlines Boeing 757 that flew silently for hours into the night, and the countless Beechcraft King Airs that have met mysterious fates, we're reminded of aviation's dual nature. It is simultaneously one of humanity's greatest achievements and a domain where we remain vulnerable to forces beyond our control. For Irving River's grandson, now serving in the military, the disappearance of Eastern Caribbean Airways Flight 912 is not just a historical curiosity or a Bermuda Triangle mystery. It's the reason he grew up without a grandfather. The reason family gatherings always had an empty chair, the reason certain questions could never be answered. For the families of MH370's passengers and crew, every piece of debris that washes ashore is both a confirmation of their worst fears and a tiny step toward understanding. Each fragment recovered from distant beaches represents a life that was lost, a story that was cut short, a future that was stolen. These disappearances remind us that despite all our technology, despite satellite tracking and radar coverage and emergency beacons, we remain at the mercy of physics and fate. A plane is a remarkable machine, but it's still just aluminum and composites and fuel, carrying fragile human beings through an environment where we were never meant to exist. The search continues for answers, for wreckage, for closure. Teams of experts pore over satellite data, ocean current models, and debris patterns. Families hold memorial services for bodies that were never recovered. Investigators write reports that end with more questions than answers. As for the fate of its passengers and crew, they all almost certainly perished in a crash in the Indian Ocean, but how and why remains a mystery. Years later, the incident remains the deadliest single case of an aircraft disappearance, one that prompted a years-long search with mixed results. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of these disappearances is the silence. In an age of constant communication, where we document every moment of our lives and stay perpetually connected, these aircraft fell silent. No final messages, no distress calls, no explanation, just the terrible silence of absence. The Piper Navajo, approaching St. Thomas on that November evening in 1978, simply stopped existing between one radar sweep and the next. MH370's sophisticated communication systems went dark, leaving only those ghostly satellite pings to mark its passage. Each represents a moment when the normal became abnormal, when routine flights became eternal mysteries. As aviation technology advances, as we develop better tracking systems and stronger black boxes, and more comprehensive safety protocols, we carry with us the lessons learned from these disappearances. Every improvement in aviation safety is, in some way, a memorial to those who were lost. But technology cannot fill the emotional void left by these mysteries. It cannot answer the why that torments families. It cannot bring back the artist, returning from showing his calligraphy, the couple on their honeymoon, the experienced pilot just doing his job, or the 239 other souls who boarded planes expecting to land safely at their destinations. What we're left with are questions that may never be answered and grief that may never fully heal. We're left with the knowledge that despite our best efforts to master the skies, we remain vulnerable. We're left with the stories of 3 planes that took off but never landed, and the hundreds of people whose final chapters we may never read. In the end, these disappearances serve as stark reminders of our limitations. They humble us. They remind us that every safe landing is a small miracle, that every completed flight is a triumph over the forces that would pull us back to Earth. They remind us to value the ordinary moments, the routine flights that end with routine landings, the pilots who deliver us safely to our destinations, the technology that works as designed. For the families still waiting for answers, for the investigators still searching for clues, for the aviation industry still learning from these tragedies, the story continues. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the ocean, wreckage lies waiting to be discovered. Somewhere in classified files or forgotten memories, clues remain hidden. Somewhere, perhaps, answers exist to questions that have haunted us for years or decades. Until those answers are found, if they ever are, we're left with the mysteries. 3 planes that took off but never landed. Hundreds of lives that ended without explanation. Families forever wondering what happened in those final moments when routine flights became anything but routine. The next time you board an aircraft, as you settle into your seat and feel the engines power up for takeoff, perhaps spare a thought for Irving Rivers making his approach to St. Thomas, for the 239 souls aboard MH370 heading into the night, for all those who took off but never landed. Remember that each flight is a leap of faith, each landing a return to the world of the living. And in that remembrance, perhaps we find the only meaning we can extract from these tragedies, a deeper appreciation for the fragility of life, the limits of our control, and the preciousness of every moment we're given. For in the end, that's all any of us have. This moment, this breath, this heartbeat, everything else, including our safe arrival at our intended destination, is never guaranteed, only hoped for. The families of the disappeared know this truth, more deeply than most. They've learned that goodbye can be final even when you don't know it, that see you later sometimes becomes never again, that the most ordinary moments can become the last memories you have of someone you love. They've learned that closure is a luxury not everyone receives, that some stories end mid-sentence, that some questions echo forever without answer. And so the search continues. The questions persist, the mysteries endure. 3 planes that took off but never landed, carrying with them hundreds of dreams, plans, and futures that would never be realized. Their disappearance changed aviation history, prompted new safety measures, and left wounds that time has not healed. In the silence of their absence, we hear the echo of every flight that didn't make it home, every journey that ended too soon, every life cut short by circumstances we may never fully understand. It's a silence that speaks volumes about our vulnerability, our mortality, and our endless quest to make sense of the senseless. These were just 3 planes among thousands that fly every day. But they became more than aircraft. They became symbols of our deepest fears and our most profound mysteries. They remind us that despite all our progress, despite all our technology, despite all our knowledge, we remain small beings in a vast universe, subject to forces beyond our control or comprehension. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. Humility in the face of the unknown, compassion for those who grieve without closure, and gratitude for every journey that ends safely, every plane that lands where it's supposed to, every welcome home that gets to be spoken. For Irving Rivers, for the 239 aboard MH370, for all those who took off but never landed, we remember. And in remembering, we honor not just their loss, but the preciousness of every life that continues, every journey that reaches its destination, every mystery that reminds us how much we still have to learn.